Hello, Berry Aftercare friends, and welcome to this week's Berry Aftercare podcast episode. Today, we're talking about alone or lonely. Are you alone ever? Or does the thought of that just send you into the major cringies? Or are you lonely? Maybe you're alone and lonely. Maybe you're not at all alone, but you're still lonely. The possibilities seem endless, but that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. And if you're watching the video, you may be seeing some fancy schmancy new equipment. And if you're listening, maybe you can notice the difference because I have decided that when I grow up, I want to be a podcaster. Not that I haven't been doing it for 150 episodes, but I'm working on improving this craft. I've actually hired a coach to help me, and I have purchased some groovy new equipment, and I hope that you can tell the difference in the sound. So tonight, yes, or maybe it's today where you are listening, but it's tonight where I'm recording, and it is super dang dark out there, and I don't like it, and it's cold. Anywho, I am here alone in my sort of studio slash office slash really nice room that I made for myself that didn't intend to be used as an office, but became an office during COVID and still is. But I am not lonely. In fact, I am home alone at the moment and I am not lonely. But I want you to know that in the past, the thought of spending any time by myself was one of the top most terrifying thoughts that I had. That may be true for you also. On the other hand, it may be true for you that given your past history with living with the disease of obesity, you have spent an inordinate amount of time being alone and or lonely. I recently asked on social media for people to give me some questions of things that I could address on the podcast. Somebody asked me about suggestions for being able to spend time alone without feeling lonely. So I thought that was a really good topic. And loneliness, excuse me if you're watching this, I have to blow my nose just a little. That's really disgusting, right? But oh well. Here we are being human. And this human has a runny nose because it's cold and flu season, even though I have neither really. But what's the difference? What's the difference? We're going to talk about the definitions of being alone and the definition of being lonely. And we're going to point out some really important benefits of spending some time alone at times. I don't think it's really good for anybody to spend too much time alone. And then we'll also talk about the difficulties associated with loneliness. And again, I may be making assumptions here, but remember, I've worked in the field of bariatrics for over 20 years at this point, and I've had a lot of people talk about the experiences of feeling lonely, whether or not they were physically alone. The disease of obesity can be very, very isolating, and that can be difficult for people's mental health. It can be difficult for a person's self esteem. A lot of times people feel ostracized, which is a form of loneliness. And then, of course, we are all still digging out from the pandemic when more and more people felt the sting of loneliness because a lot of people spent a lot of time alone and felt very cut off socially. So they experienced being alone and loneliness. And my heart still breaks for when I think about how many people suffered with the disease of COVID by themselves, being alone and lonely and frightened and all kinds of unpleasant and uncomfortable feelings. And then family members who weren't able to be with them. So we all experienced a collective form of loneliness, I believe, through the pandemic, and that has had some lasting effects on our society. So we're going to talk about the difficulties associated with loneliness and then talk about some tips for learning to be alone and being okay being alone and not feeling lonely when we are alone. And I do want to use my own life as an example, and I want to share what I've learned from so many bariatric patients over the years about this topic of loneliness. And when I say I dreaded being alone for so many years because I was afraid of my own mind. I was afraid. I struggled, like many of you who are listening have struggled with anxiety, with depression, with a frightening OCD, intrusive thoughts, with suicidal thoughts. So a lot of us have struggled with the fear of being alone for the fear of our brains taking us down an even darker road if left alone. So, we're going to address all of that, but talk about tips for learning to be alone and not lonely. And in my case, at least, dealing with so many of my mental health issues, my fears, letting them be real instead of trying to smash them away has really allowed me to find a lot of joy and comfort when I'm alone. And good thing too, because at this point in my life, I do spend a lot of time alone. I had children, raised children, was busy in all of their social activities like a lot of you are. You're very busy with your jobs and social activities and kids and spouses and partners. And, we live very, very busy lives. And with social media, we never really have to be alone. But it's important to learn to be okay being alone. The older we get, the greater the likelihood that we're going to find ourselves alone. And if we can have the luxury of practicing and learning being okay being alone before we are maybe forced to be alone through the loss of a partner or a family member, then we will have had some practice and it won't be such a crushing blow. But let's get started. Let's get started, and we're going to talk about the importance of spending quality time by yourself, which is the definition of being alone. It's just spending time by myself. I am without other people. And to make yourself truly alone, I'm not on social media. I don't always have the television on, don't have the radio on. Being alone, being okay by myself. When we think about having a healthy relationship, and whether that's a partnership or a friendship, part of that definition is having quality time together. And if you're familiar with the five love languages, a lot of people have the love language of quality time. I love the idea. And in all of my work with bariatric patients, I really encourage people to learn to value themselves more than maybe in the past. Because having a good relationship with ourselves, one in which we monitor the self talk, we minimize the bashing of one's self, which may be a lifelong habit. We've talked about that on so many of these episodes. So we want to diminish the badgering of ourselves, the beating on ourselves when we are alone, and increase the quality time. So when I spend quality time with my friends or with my partner, we're not sitting there bashing each other because that would not, by definition, meet the criteria for quality time, at least not in my book. So think of this spending time alone by yourself as time to improve that relationship with yourself, and think of it as setting aside some quality time with yourself for yourself, in part to develop that healthy relationship. So it's important that we take time and schedule time to be alone between social interactions, right? It's not meaning I'm going to spend all of my time alone. There's a difference between being alone and making that a choice and choosing to have some quality time with myself versus isolating myself. And isolation can be a function of being depressed or anxious. And we'll get to that when we talk more about mental health. There's a lot of evidence that's growing that's saying that time spent alone, that we make quality time. And that is something we have to take responsibility for. Instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to sit here alone by myself for a while. No, make it quality time. And we'll talk about ways to make being alone quality time. But the research is saying this is absolutely critical to our well-being, especially in the day and age where we live. Like I said, social media, my gosh, it's astounding when people look at the time they've spent on social media on their phones and they realize they're spending 4 or more hours a day. That is not quality alone time. And again, we're finding that quality alone time is so critical to our overall well being. So sometimes not having the distractions of other people, not having the distractions or influence of other people's opinions all the time, because we know what happens if we do some of that social media, social comparison. We tend to get down on ourselves. So sometimes getting the influences of other people away from us, their opinions, just getting it out of our head and say, wait a minute, who am I and what do I really believe? Who is it I want to be? I talk a lot in the bariatric community about determining your meaningful matters. Why did you want to have bariatric surgery? Why do you want to work so hard to keep the weight off? What is meaningful to you about losing and keeping weight off? What matters the most to you about losing weight and keeping it off? You can do this in relation to time alone with myself. What matters most to you about having time with yourself? And we'll talk about some of these benefits because maybe you're not able to think of anything right off the top of your head. You're like, what are you talking about? I hate being alone. Why would I want to think about that? So I'll give you some suggestions and maybe you can come up with a meaningful matter or things that are meaningful for you about spending time alone and why it matters for you as a post op or someone who's preparing to have surgery to have time alone. And for those of you who have spent a lot of time feeling lonely in the past, this may seem especially frightening. So I want you to maybe open your mind a little bit to the possibility that creating some alone time does not have to equal the kind of loneliness you may have felt in the isolation that can come from being a very heavy person in a social world that can really ostracize people who carry extra weight. The loneliest time of my life was when I went off to college at the age of 17, and it was excruciating for me. I felt like I could have died and nobody in my family, nobody on the planet would have known or cared for weeks on end, and that was an excruciating feeling for me. And so I can imagine that many of you who have spent days, weeks, months, or years feeling extremely lonely or isolated in your disease wouldn't want to welcome any time alone by yourself. But let's explore this with a little open mind and maybe rethink what being alone can mean for your mental health in a positive way. All right, so we want to talk about this research, that shows that getting away from the opinions and influence of other people can be a really good thing. So, alone means creating quality time for ourselves, whereas being loneliness or experiencing loneliness, being loneliness. I am being loneliness. Experiencing loneliness is distressing. It's a feeling that is not comfortable. It causes you angst, and it's accompanied by the perception. Now, this word is important. Perception means these are my thoughts, these are my beliefs about it. So, loneliness is brought about by perceiving that my social needs aren't being met, either by the quantity of time that I spend with people or the quality of my social relationships. So maybe you're around people all the time, but you're still feeling lonely. Now, a lot of people in the bariatric community that I've worked with have shared with me that they will make these assumptions. They don't call them assumptions, they don't refer to it as setting yourself up for being miserable, but it really is a form. It's that perception thing. It's like when you're eating in a restaurant, people say, I really feel like everybody's watching every bite that I put in my mouth or what I'm ordering. The truth is, most people probably aren't. I'm sure you've had an experience or several of them in your lifetime where maybe that's been the case because people have said to you, do you really need to have that? Are you sure you want? So I understand that that is the truth in some circumstances. But I believe also that the perception then becomes that most people are thinking that, or most people are watching you, when it's probably not actually true. So we have to discern what is truly happening and what is our perception. So maybe you have the perception based on real experiences, maybe from childhood or maybe throughout your entire life, where you're with a group of people, but you feel your perception, your thought, your beliefs are that they don't really want me here. They're just putting up with me. They're just not wanting to be rude. That is something that perhaps you've created. Now, it may be based on actual experiences that have happened, but maybe you've extrapolated that or made it into a bigger deal in more situations than is actually the case. So we're going to want to use the four aces that I talk, excuse me, that I talk about. Awareness. Awareness of, is this really happening? Or is this part of the perception that I have carried with me? Am I doing a little unhealthy mind reading? And that may be creating some of the loneliness that I'm feeling. It may be creating some of the distress that I'm feeling. So, awareness and then acceptance. Acceptance that, yes, I've had truly ostracizing moments. Yes, I've had times when people have definitely been watching what I eat and commenting on it. But accepting that in most cases, it's probably not the case. So we have acceptance, awareness, accountability. I am responsible for finding the logic in the situation. So maybe you're in a situation at a restaurant and those automatic negative thoughts that, oh my God, everybody's watching what I eat, they're paying attention to what I'm ordering. And then we have very much distress. Our emotions are like, ah. Then we use our logic to go, okay, that has happened in the past. And even if it's happening today, that's a them issue, not a me issue. I am responsible for my thoughts, and I am choosing to think, if they're thinking that, too bad for them. And I'm going to take care of myself. So we've got accountability and we've got an attitude, right? We have to decide. Am I going to allow these distressing feelings that may be related to past realistic situations to affect me today? Or am I going to use my adulting skills to regulate these emotions? In other words, I'm bringing some logic in here. I'm going to balance my thoughts and my emotions, and I'm going to choose to believe that if they got a problem with it, then it's they who got the problem. So there you have that. So we use those 4 ACEs. I'm going to put effort into making this a pleasant experience and calming my distress. And I'm going to make a commitment to myself to look for the best and not think the worst. So there you have that part. So loneliness, the distressing feeling that accompanies your own thoughts about your social needs, whether they're being met by others or not. So there's some accountability that comes here by looking at, am I making this worse than it needs to be? Oh, now that's not to say that loneliness, when you really believe, you know what, the quality of my relationships pretty much sucks. And this can happen a lot after weight loss surgery and after you lose a lot of weight because relationships, as we know, change after surgery. And you may not feel like you fit in with the people you hung out with before. And that can lead to fear of being abandoned, a fear of feeling that distressing emotion that comes along with loneliness. And we'll talk about the importance of finding a new community and finding a place where you do feel like you fit in. But that can be a really distressing transition, and it can be a time of loneliness. And your family may say prior to the whole experience of you having surgery and whatever that they're going to support you. But then lo and behold, everybody's worlds get a little bit rocked and now they feel different in relation to you because now maybe your sister is the heavy one and she doesn't like it. Or maybe your spouse who, proclaimed that they were going to support you all of a sudden feels left out of your life and starts to sabotage you. So there can be loneliness at all kinds of levels following weight loss surgery. So we're going to talk about how to deal with the loneliness and create healthy community because we are born for connection. And I believe that even the most introverted introverts, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, has a need for social connection. We are created for connections. Human beings are social people. And when we don't feel connected, whether it's a perception, because perception is reality, right? We may have to tweak our thinking a little bit, but we also have to take a look at times when loneliness is real and we do feel very much alone. And either the quality of our relationships isn't very good or there aren't very many people in our circle. And that can be very lonely. So, you know, feeling isolated is not good. We want social connection. So, loneliness can be harmful if it's feeling like a punishment or if you feel excluded. I don't care if we're kids or adults or seniors or really, really old people. Feeling excluded is excruciating. We all want to fit in. All right, so let's get on to the reasons that people choose. Remember, being alone is sometimes a good, healthy choice. And we'll talk about the benefits of being alone. You may be an introvert because this business of feeling alone versus being alone a lot of times depends a lot on your personality. So we are born either on this continuum. We're either more introverted or we're more extroverted. Introverts are like, I need my time alone. That's where I get energized. I would rather spend time alone than go through the rigors of being with other people all the time. Because for an introvert, being with other people a lot, social gatherings, big, constant interaction with other people is draining. It's exhausting. The older I get, the more I recognize that there's a lot of introvert in me. Now, I know how to be extroverted. People who are truly extroverted, man, they want to be around people most of the time. They get energized by being with people. They love that. It's like, oh, this just lights me up. Now, if you're an introvert, it doesn't mean you don't need social connection. All human beings need social connection. And if you're an extrovert, it doesn't mean that you don't need or are not capable of enjoying your own company. I think that's something that we all need to learn. Again, if you spent a lot of time because of your disease of obesity feeling really left out and experience a lot of painful loneliness, it's going to be hard for you to even imagine the thought of being alone and enjoying your own company, but you can learn this skill. So there are times when it's good to be alone. A really important time to spend time alone, to create time for yourself, is if you're in a season of change in your life. Maybe you're going through a major life transition, like when you go to college. It's okay to spend some time alone, but not too much time alone. That isolation that I fell into was not healthy. But taking time alone in a time of transition, again, it could be going to college, or it could be leaving college and entering the career world, or it could be changing careers. It could be going from a person who carried a lot of weight before surgery to becoming a person who has lost a tremendous amount of weight in a short period of time, like many of you who are listening. Huge season of change. Taking time alone during these times of transition is critical because you want to catch up with yourself. If we overly busy ourselves, we don't give ourselves time to quiet our mind, listening to what's going on within us, paying attention to what people refer to as that small, still voice within us that says, hey, maybe you're partying too much, or hey, maybe you've gotten involved with some people that really clash with your own values. Maybe you need to regroup. So if you're in a season of change in your life, when you're putting an effort into maybe connecting with people at college, or connecting with people at your job, or connecting with people in the bariatric community, whatever it is, make sure to schedule some time alone so you can sort through, are the changes I'm making leading me in the direction that I want to go? Are the people I'm interacting with sharing the kinds of values I have for my life? And again, going to be part of moving me in a direction that I want to go in. So you've got to quiet your mind and listen. Maybe go for a walk. Maybe just lay on the floor, close your eyes, and just be still. Now, it doesn't have to be for an incredibly long time, especially if you're not used to that, but it is important. It's important at these times also to spend some time alone if you're doing some personal planning. Or I used to work with students who were in medical school or nursing school and dental school. And when I went through my licensing process, if you're doing some intense studying, sometimes it's good to have a study group, but sometimes it's really important to take some time alone and be in the quiet and let your hard work sink in. You're going to have improved focus. You're going to have less distraction. If you're planning the next season of your life, or if you're planning on how to get involved in a new community, if you're planning on how to restructure your social life as a post op, maybe spending a little bit of time saying, okay, what do I see out there in social media world? There are people who are going off the deep end after having weight loss surgery. There are people who are creating wonderful things for other people in the bariatric community. There are people who are kind of just taking a little bit of time out of the social realm to just get comfortable with their new size, shape people. What appeals to me? Do I want to go do the way crazy party thing where I'm making up for lost time? Maybe I do. Maybe I want to experiment with that. Do I want to get involved with the people in the community who are really trying to create, exercise groups or support groups or walking groups or whatever kind of social kind of community that I would like to be involved in? Or do I just want to take a step back? So look around you, take some time alone to do this personal planning. Maybe set some goals. You might want to include your family's input, your friends' input. But there's a time to spend by yourself and say, will what I'm doing or what I'm planning move me closer to who I say I want to be in my life, whether it's in relation to your weight or your education or uh, your spiritual life or your financial life. Taking some time alone is important. It's also important if you're working on self improvement, if you're trying to get to know yourself better, or maybe you're in therapy and you're working on dealing with anxiety or setting boundaries or learning to avoid toxic people, places, or things. It's important that you spend some time alone and maybe do some of that therapy work like journaling or, oh, God, I always tell people write that therapeutic letter. What that means is you sit down and maybe you're really hurt about the way a particular family member or many people treated you when you were carrying extra weight. So maybe you write a letter where you get your feelings out, your thoughts out, and you don't want to send this letter. This is one where you just give yourself permission to get it all out without worrying about how you say it or what kind of language you use or what kind of name calling. It doesn't matter. You're getting it out, but you got to do this by yourself. And then you can read it to your therapist or a good friend and get rid of it. Whatever you do, if you're working on your self improvement, you're going to have to spend a little bit of time alone. Sometimes we need to spend time in pain intentionally, and I don't mean physical pain. I mean emotional pain, because if we're sorting through painful parts of our lives, we're going to feel that pain. And we don't like that. And I get that. But in order to get to the other side of pain, sometimes we have to sit with it, write that letter, get it out of us, read it to somebody so we've shared it, and then move on. So, some benefits of spending some time alone are working through pain, improving ourself, regrouping. So, maybe you had a really bad week. Maybe your eating was, really off kilter. So maybe spending some time alone to regroup and go, all right, what's been going on with me? Is there something bothering me? It's the old, it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you kind of thing. What's eating you that you're going out there and eating things that are not in line with your bariatric goals? So learning from that and saying, okay, what can I do sort of to stop the bleeding here? What can I do to interrupt this negative pattern that I've gotten into? And maybe spending some time with yourself going, or what was the situation? How was I feeling leading into that situation? What can I do differently? So regrouping, reprioritizing, letting yourself feel the feels. If you're trying to be creative, you want to balance your time with others and alone. So maybe your creativity is making music. Some time alone, some time with others is good. Maybe you're a writer. Some time alone is probably really good. Maybe some time in a writing group to balance that out to get new ideas. And if you're new at this spending time alone thing, do it in a public place. Go to a library, go to a coffee shop. Too much time alone can lead to negative thinking, right? And we all know that our thoughts and our feelings and our actions are connected. So if I spend too much time alone, then I start to go, maybe nobody wants to be with me. I start the negative thinking, the stinking thinking. The stinking thinking is going to lead to unpleasant emotions, which may lead to unhealthy actions. So, to prevent that, maybe put yourself in a social situation where you still have the time to think alone and do your creative kind of thing alone. I love sitting in a coffee shop and doing some work. I think it's a great way to be alone but not necessarily lonely. Or go to the library. Go somewhere where there are other people, but you can still spend that alone thought time. A really great benefit of spending some time alone, especially later in the evening, which can be kind of scary for people because later in the evening for a lot of people is the time when you snack more. So making sure that your home or your space is a safe zone without the temptation of unhealthy foods. But winding down, there's a lot of information on sleep hygiene, which means shutting off the social media, shutting off the television, getting rid of the blue light or whatever the heck it is, the noise, the chaos, and really enjoying that time and just going, you know what? What did I do well today? What didn't I do so well today? What can I maybe do to make amends for something I'm not proud of today? Or how can I tweak my goals a little bit so that I can follow through a little bit better tomorrow? So, taking that time, there's this great little sheet that I created called the Daily Form. It's free, it's an amazing way to restructure your thinking, to focus on what you're doing well, to take accountability for what you want to change. Great way to slow your brain down and take a healthy focus on yourself, spending your time alone. Spending time alone can increase your productivity because you have fewer distractions. That's why a lot of people will spend, it's like, geez, I want to go to the office when nobody's there, or I want to stay late when nobody's there. Nobody's knocking on the door, the phone's not ringing, da 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 da. It increases your productivity. Or maybe you choose to have your alone time to not be at all productive and just practice the art of being. So many people, human beings, have become human doings. And it's important to take a step back and just be once in a while. So maybe your time alone is intentionally focused on not being productive. And that can be okay too. So we talked about regrouping, but we can also reboot. Maybe we're tired, we're sick of the noise, we're sick of the people, and we just need to have a little bit of stress reduction. Give our minds a break from the constant stimulation, the constant activity, maybe using one of the midweek meditations, even if it's not midweek, right? Those don't have to be just done on Wednesday. Use the midweek meditation from the Bariatric Care program and just listen to me doing a little guided meditation or leading you in some breathing exercises to calm your mind, which will calm your body. Get to know yourself better, which is something I know a lot of us are afraid to do. But as you take a few minutes of time, you can discover things about yourself like, if I were to read a book, God forbid, what might it be on? Or I could even listen to the book if I don't like to read the books. Or if I were to engage in a hobby, just kind of entertain different thoughts. Get to know yourself. Taking time alone is a great way to build mental strength and to learn to deal with your emotions. So, again, so many of us have wanted to spend as much time and energy as necessary to get away from ourselves, to get away from any distressing emotions. But we are going to get older one day. You may be 22, you may be 45, but someday, chances are, you're going to be spending more and more time alone and you don't want to be lonely. So, why not prepare for that by getting to know yourself and finding things that you enjoy doing when you are alone? Kids are great at this, or at least they used to be. I don't know with all the technology available today, but sorting through baseball cards or my husband, God love him, used to look through the encyclopedias. That man knows so much ridiculous trivia. And I don't mean like it's a bad thing. I mean, it's just amazing to me. He'd say, "Oh, I used to look through the encyclopedias." Find things that aren't distracting, but are educational or entertaining to you in a non social media way. Also, we need to learn to comfort ourselves. One of the greatest things we can do is learn to reparent ourselves. A lot of people in the bariatric community and the world in general have had some negative experiences with teachers, coaches, peers, parents. And so we need to learn to parent ourselves in healthy ways. If a child came to you and they were upset because they were bullied, how would you comfort that child today? You can do the same for yourself. Put yourself in the role of a parent you wish you had had, or a mentor you wish you had had as a child, and learn the skills of healthy comforting for yourself. There's studies also that show that the ability to tolerate time alone leads to increased happiness. Remember, we talked about the house of happiness not too long ago? But learning to comfort yourself, learning to tolerate, dare I say, enjoy time alone is linked to increased happiness, better life satisfaction, and improved stress management. All good things. People who are okay being alone have less depression. So that is a benefit. And you can maybe even take that time when you choose to spend by yourself and do things that make you happy. Maybe your partner or your kids or whatever, you're always giving, 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 giving. Let me tell you how many times a day I hear that we're always giving, giving, giving. And maybe you just want to sit and look at pictures of butterflies or look at how to plant a well, what's that flower that's really hard to grow? I'm trying to learn about those myself. I can never think what the dang things are called. But orchids, yeah, you wanna learn to grow orchids, and maybe it's like, "Oh, I'm gonna discover how to do that. Time by myself." Do what makes you happy, dance like nobody's watching, maybe even actually dance when nobody is watching. For kids too, if you've got kids, kids are so dang overstimulated, and I think adults are too. We're not good at just having solitude, but for children, it can really reduce behavior problems. A lot of research shows that kids who learn to spend time by themselves are better behaved than other kids. So be a good role model and maybe say, all right, everybody to your rooms, no social media. We're all going to take a whopping 10 minutes and just be alone because doing so improves physical health, it improves mental health. You can address those depression things. Maybe you're in therapy, you got assignments, do them during that time. Maybe some anxiety. Practice some self soothing skills, the deep breathing, the relaxation. And then by spending some time by yourself and getting away from all the opinions and judgments of people, you're more prepared and geared up when you spend time with people again. You're kind of renewed. You have the ability to have improved relationships because you've taken some time for yourself. There's a book that's called Going Solo, and it was written by a sociologist named Eric Kleinberg. And he says that 1 in 7 adults lives alone. 1 in 7 adults lives alone. And he found that not only were these adults not lonely, many actually had richer social lives. And I think that's a really good thing. And it speaks volumes about the importance of having that space, having that time alone. It makes you like yourself better and enjoy social gatherings better. All right. So let's talk about the difficulties that are associated with loneliness, that perception that goes along with those distressed feelings. And it's so easy to get lonelier and lonelier by getting involved in more and more negative thoughts. So you're sitting alone and you're like, "Oh God, it's Friday night. Everybody else in the whole world is out there doing something. What's wrong with me? I'm a loser. I'm a loner." That kind of thinking will spiral you down very, very quickly. If you're an emotional eater, you know where that's going to lead you. So we have to work hard to fight against stinking thinking and reframe that. So my little grandson was over here today because he was sick and not able to go to school. And he's in middle school and, you know, 11-year-old boy, not thrilled about sitting all day long in school. And so he was telling me how he doesn't like to sit still in school all day long and he no longer enjoys school. So I had to have this reframing your thinking talk. And I shared with him that I sit in this exact chair sometimes 12 hours a day. Not that I'm seeing 12 patients a day, but I do a lot of my hobbies like podcasting where I'm sitting alone in this chair for a lot of time. And I said, sometimes when I'm working and I would rather be podcasting or writing, I'm like, oh, I just can't sit here any longer. And I have to reframe that and say, how awesome is it that I get to sit at home in my chair and work? How awesome is it that I get to have this beautiful room to be in and don't have to go out into the traffic and deal with people, at the office and, the office drama. So, how can you reframe the thought of being at school or, being able to have the opportunity to be in the school you're in, blah, blah, blah? How can you reframe being alone and not turn it into loneliness by virtue of your stinking thinking? Now, that's not always going to work. And if a person truly is lonely, has very few people in their life, has very few healthy social connections, you may be struggling with a period of loneliness. And loneliness can have devastating health consequences. Prolonged periods of loneliness can lead to high blood pressure, hastened or you know, cognitive decline, meaning your cognitive skills, your thinking abilities are going to decline more rapidly than if you're not lonely. It can lead to an increased risk of Alzheimer's or dementia. That's that cognitive decline. Social anxiety. So if you spend way too much time alone, then maybe you experience social anxiety when you are in the midst of other people. And it's finding that balance, right? I spend a lot of time alone during the week. I have a lot of social time on the weekend. So it gives me that nice balance. But what I found recently is, during COVID and since that time, I really took to doing most of my exercise, my yoga, my walking alone. And I started to feel lonely in that. And so just recently, the past couple of months, I've returned to a yoga studio. So if you're feeling excessively lonely, then you're going to have to find and create some ways to diminish or lessen that feeling of loneliness. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But that's one of the ways that I have combated some loneliness in my exercise world. So, loneliness, social anxiety, increased risk for health problems, higher risk for depression, higher risk for anxiety, higher risk for obesity, which is what we are already combating in a post op life, increased risk for high blood pressure, stress, sleep problems, and ultimately early death. So, it's not something we want to mess with, this loneliness business. But as with anything else in your post op life, nobody can do it for you. So as a post-op, nobody can do your meal prep for you unless you pay them, which if you can, do it for God's sake. I don't like to cook, so if I can pay somebody to do that for me, do it. But nobody can put that healthy food in your mouth for you. Nobody can do your exercise for you. There are just some things that we can't pay people to do for us. So if you're going to reap the benefits, you have to put forth the effort. And the same can be true with this business of loneliness. So we don't want to have increased anxiety. We don't want to have increased depression. Too many people are already struggling with those things. And we all have to take the responsibility for getting the help that we need if we are struggling with those things. So, here's some tips for learning to be alone and not experiencing loneliness. Again, it's something we have to practice. If you've not ever engaged in movement or exercise for a continuous amount of years or weeks, you have to learn to do that slowly. And if that means you start by just putting those shoes on and walking to the mailbox, that's how you start. If that means you lay on your yoga mat and just lay there for 10 minutes, that's a start. If it means you go to the gym and you walk inside and you don't do anything on any equipment, but you walk out, that's a start. If you buy a bicycle and you sit on that sucker for 5 minutes, that's a start. It's the same with learning to spend time alone. So you need to make this happen. You need to make everything that happens in your bariatric post life happen. The same is true with this. So, learning to spend time alone and not be lonely can start by setting aside a few minutes a day just to be alone. Now, you can do meditation, you can do mindfulness breathing, you can do relaxation, but maybe start with 1 minute. Maybe you find like, well, I guess I can do that. Maybe next week, increase it to 3 minutes, increase it to 5 minutes, increase it to 10 minutes, but pick a time. Maybe it's right after work. Maybe you sit in your car in quiet for 10 minutes before you go into the house. Maybe if you work from home like me, you shut everything down. And for 10 minutes before you get on to other areas of your life, you just be. You just be. Turn off the social media because distractions like the radio, the television, the social media, the chatter in the background, that doesn't count. Spend time not reading, not doing anything but just being. Now, if you get comfortable doing that and you want to spend more time alone, then you can add things like reading or exercising because there are healthy forms of distraction, such as reading or exercise. There are also unhealthy forms of distraction. Distraction from what? From ourselves, right? We don't want to be with ourselves. God forbid I spend 5 minutes with my brain. Starting slow and learning we can tolerate it is how we build that tolerance. Just like if you've never exercised, doing so for 5 minutes is how you start, and then 6 minutes, and then maybe 8 minutes, and maybe 12 minutes. Incrementally increase your time so that when you're comfortable spending time alone, you can fill it with some healthy distractions. There's a Harvard dude named Dan Wegner. He says, when we try to resist something, it tends to persist. So I'm trying to resist this time by myself because I'm fearful. Well, that fear of being alone then is just going to persist. So just feel the fear and do it anyway, but set up a reasonable amount of time to do it so that we can get over this fear. Because it can feel really uncomfortable. But taking the time helps you overcome that fear. So try things. Maybe you start your alone time in the coffee shop or in the library or walking by yourself in the mall. There are still other people around, and yet you're taking that time just for you. So maybe that's a good way to start. And then move on to other kinds of things. Taking a walk with yourself, or maybe with the dog. I did a super brave thing a couple of years ago, and I went to a Keith Urban concert all by myself. And let me tell you, I had the best time. My son helped me get a ticket because it was the day of. And if you're looking for a single ticket day of, you can get pretty darn close to that stage. So I got an amazing ticket, very close, made friends with the people around me, friends for the night, just chatted and had a great time. And what an amazing experience. And it taught me that I can. I think I can. I think I can. I knew I could. I knew I could be that person. Maybe don't go out for dinner by yourself, but try lunch. Ooh, get really super brave and go to the movies by yourself. My husband goes to the movies every Tuesday night because he's out of town and I'm not a big moviegoer. He loves the movies. So maybe, I have known, and we just had on the podcast episode a few episodes ago about Kenda, who travels by herself as a post-op and loves it. So you can travel by yourself. Take a class by yourself, a painting class or a calligraphy. Hell, I don't know. Take any kind of class that interests you and go do something. Meetup.com. There are all kinds of interesting things that you can join so you don't have to be alone, but you're taking the risk to do this on your own. So make a list of things that seem interesting to you. Going to a museum, get out there and volunteering. So again, these are things where you don't have to be isolated and yet you can do them on your own. This builds up so much self-efficacy, and it has nothing to do with your bariatric world. But if you build self-efficacy, meaning I think I can do these things in another arena, you can transfer that skill to the world of bariatric living. I think I can meal prep. I think I can eat every 3 hours as scheduled, or 4 hours, or whatever your dietitian has recommended for you. I think I can whatever it is. I think I can get out there and walk for 5 minutes. So you develop your self efficacy, and that leads to improved self worth. It leads to increased motivation. Doing begets doing more. So we got to start somewhere, right? Now, being outside can have a huge beneficial impact on a person's well being. The sunshine, the vitamin D, the nature, the vibrations of the earth, all of those things are so, so good for us. And so many people stay inside on social media and gaming and all. Get your butt outside. Get some of that beautiful sunshine, the fresh air, and spend 5 minutes outside by yourself. Increase it to 7 minutes. Do the walk if you don't like sitting still. But the restorative effects of that have been proven over and over and over again. Practicing self-care is a great way to increase your mental health. And self-care is often a solo experience. Choosing to eat well, choosing to get out and do whatever kind of movement you enjoy, getting enough sleep, practicing meditation. Nobody can do these things for you. These are examples of self-care. And if you think about it, these are acts that you do on your own. So take that as a win. And at the end of your day, when you're using your daily form and you're saying, what did I do well today? Remember, you've probably done a lot of things. Find some balance between being alone and being with others. Don't be afraid to say no. If you're just like, I am so sick of people, it's okay to say no. Feel the feels. Feel the feels. There's no way out but through. And I know we want to avoid distressing, unpleasant emotions, but giving yourself the gift of sitting with them, processing through them, again, increases your self efficacy, knowing that you can. Silence. I took a meditation class. It was like an 8-week meditation class. And the last day of the class, check this out, 8-hour silent day. We were with people the whole day. There were a whole group. Our whole class was together, but we were silent the entire day. So the leader would have us get up and go for a walk. But during that walk, we were silent. We would sit and journal for a little bit. We would eat our lunch together, but silently. We would spend some silent time sitting with our eyes closed. It was an amazing day, and it went by really, really quickly. But for some people, silence can be definitely scary and difficult. Start small. Start small. Do some meditation. Again, it can be guided, it can be silent. People tend to describe their thoughts and feelings of loneliness with words like anxiety, fear, helplessness. Those powerful, powerful emotions really are going to influence the way we act. If we're thinking that way and we're acting that way, we're increasing the distress. So make a plan to overcome and learn to be alone. That way, you can learn not to be so lonely. Reframe those thoughts to, I'm choosing to spend some time alone. I will engage with other people. Make a plan. Plan something. Plan the time alone and then plan activities with others. So let's just do some final thoughts about the benefits of being alone. There are benefits, but we are not intended to isolate. Isolation can be a sign of severe depression, severe anxiety. So, isolation means I'm not making time to talk to people. I'm not answering calls. I'm not answering texts. I'm not answering emails. I'm not going to meetings. I'm not going to support group. Make yourself get out there and do stuff because isolation can be very, very self damaging. It's about balance, it's about finding that balance. So, this is a big order. This is a tall order, but here's your take home messages for this episode. Practice the time alone, just like you practice the piano, just like you practice a new language, just like you practice eating like a healthy post op, because practice makes progress. So remember, do the practice, give yourself credit for the progress, and use the four ACEs for a long time: awareness, acceptance, being accountable, choosing your attitude about it, making a commitment to doing so, putting effort into it. And the benefit is self growth, learning to like yourself, learning to enjoy being with yourself. So there you go. And I would encourage you, here's an invitation: do this with your friends or your family and say, you know what? If you're home and you've got a family, we're all going for 10 minutes. And then let's come back and talk about what it was like. Or your circle of friends in the bariatric community. Let's all practice being alone and let's get together tonight on Zoom and talk about what the experience was like. That's a way to have that balance, right? You're taking the time alone, but you're processing it with your group. Remember, we are talking about your health. All of this is part of your healthy bariatric post op living. So, your health, your responsibility this day and all the days. Now, next week, we're going to do something called Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. Who has the best excuses of all? You don't want to miss that. We're going to be talking about excuses, which again came through asking people what they wanted to talk about. There were several people who asked, how do I confront in a kind and loving way my friend, my spouse, my whomever who's making a bunch of excuses? Or what do I do to deal with my own excuses? So that's the plan, but who knows? Somebody may appear and I do an amazing interview. We don't know, but be here. Join us next time for Bari Aftercare, the podcast. And please know, I appreciate you. I appreciate you recommending the podcast to others. And if you have a note, a comment, or a request for a topic, I would love to know it. Thanks so much for being with me today. Take care. I will be with you next time. Bye bye.